Hi, everyone. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about social justice wolves in sheep's clothing. And so we're going to look at the communist war on the West, and particularly the communist war on America. And we're going to note that this has been going on now, a waged war that we might not even know about here in the West. It's been going on now since at least the 1950s, 1960s. Now, we have from 1963 a congressional record which documented some of the terrible desires that the communists had, and bad ideas that they came up with, and how they wanted to wage a secret battle against the United States and our Christian heritage and our Christian values. And so you're in the right place at the right time. Stay tuned. I came back to Christianity not too long ago. It was around 2011, 2012, and I found myself sitting next to a pastor on a plane. And this was after I had prayed to God to give me the truth. I, unbeknownst to me, had been following sort of a weak Christian idea. I was thinking that Jesus was not necessarily the resurrected Christ. I was thinking he was just a great moral teacher. And this was consistent with some New Age beliefs that I've found out later have been prevalent. And I had been reading books by people like Wayne Dyer and the Dalai Lama and others thinking that this was the truth. Well, turns out I found myself next to a pastor on a plane who recommended that I read C.S. Lewis's adult books after finding out that I really wanted to write a book like C.S. Lewis's children's books. Among my favorite books as a child were the Chronicles of Narnia, especially The Last Battle and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And so I always admired C.S. Lewis, but I didn't even know he had adult books. Since then, after getting off the plane, I ordered a whole bunch of C.S. Lewis's books. And he's just been a really great influence on me. And so I highly recommend that you make your way over to watch C.S. Lewis on videos. You can see him. You can find him on YouTube videos. You can find, not himself, he actually passed away on the exact same day as Aldous Huxley and John F. Kennedy in 1963. However, you will find C.S. Lewis, people reading his books and that sort of thing if you want an audio. Now, if you want to actually read the books, I would highly recommend picking them up. And you can probably find some free PDFs online if you're strapped for some cash. But anyway, here's what he said that really made an impact on me. And this particular thing is called the trilemma. And it said, a man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Very powerful to me because I thought that that was all he was. However, as you probably noted, if you've listened to any of my videos, I've done a lot of research on the resurrection and we have tons of support. Okay, we've got lots and lots of evidence. I'm not the kind of person, and neither are any sorts of people that I know who follow Christianity, are going to believe on blind faith. We believe evidentially. Okay. I also have faith. Faith is your first step, but I've also had spiritual experiences, and I've talked to a lot of other people who have. I'm hardly unique. So let me give you a little information about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some of the secular things that have crept into our society. One of my favorite graduate assistants from a handful of years ago grew up in Sweden, where she was raised in a Christian home by very loving parents. I met her parents upon her first graduation from an undergraduate program, business management. I also attended, of course, her second graduation because I go to those anyway. But I attended hers from the MBA program. Very smart woman. She had a 4.0 or right there. She's like a 3.98. Really, really smart. And anyway, so I met her parents, and they gave me this book called Jerusalem by Selma Lagerlöf. And it presented a fictional account of a humble group of Swedes from the 19th century who initiated a trek to Jerusalem to walk in the way of the Lord. My graduate assistant's mother is a Christian priest, very devout woman, very interesting, loving woman, and her husband, very loving man too. But despite her bucolic upbringing, my graduate assistant encountered much evil following high school from relative strangers in Sweden. For her privacy, I won't disclose the details here. Suffice it to say, her experiences may have contributed to her present agnosticism. I keep in touch with her. And as far as I know, she's still an agnostic. This has been going back a few years. But I feel that at some point, God will make himself known to her in a way that she really can't deny. He's going to make her an offer she can't refuse. That's what he does. So changes in the Swedish culture over the past few decades may have also contributed. In 2016, the Gallup poll found that 55% of Swedes considered themselves non-religious and 18% self-reported as atheists. Between 2010 and 2019, Statistica.com found the share of people who believe in God in Sweden decreased from 47 to 36%, making Sweden the least religious Western nation in the world. Now, why am I talking about Sweden? Well, number one, it's the least religious Western nation in the world. Another reason I'm bringing up Sweden is because it's the source of a lot of secular beliefs. Now, Sweden only has about 10 million people, which is half of what the state of Florida has. But one thing Sweden does have, and that's been able to do, and it's really been kicking in full force in recent years especially, but since about the 1970s, 1980s, Sweden has engaged in another number of social policies where they've got a very strong welfare system. In other words, what I should say is people pay very high taxes and they get a lot of benefits out of it. So the taxes might be 50% of the income. However, people get free health care. If you have a baby in Sweden, you're entitled to a year of maternity leave. You are also entitled to some paternity leave. So if you're the father of the child, you're also entitled to a leave. They have lots of benefits with schooling, both preschool, like we don't have here in the United States, and college benefits for schooling. Okay, so a lot of this stuff is funded. And so they have a lot of social safety nets. Now, what researchers have found concerning social safety nets in places like Sweden is where they've had these things, people, especially those people who have these levels of extrinsic religiosity, that means you're using the church to benefit yourself because you want to be around a group of other people. So it's like, what can the church do for me? I go to church because I'm in this community. Okay, so maybe people who are high in extrinsic religiosity, who don't need the services of the church, who feel like they can get this social support elsewhere, and they don't need any financial help from the church because now they're given that from the government. And the government also has taken care of a lot of the poor people. They've eliminated poverty to a pretty large extent in Sweden. And so since the government takes care of that, people aren't taking care of that themselves. They can let everything be handled by the government. So you don't see the people maybe in the soup kitchens and doing things that you do see in the United States where we don't have these kinds of social safety nets. Now, given the fact that we have 327 million people here in the United States, we're not exactly at all in the same kind of position as Sweden. We've also got a very heterogeneous society here in the United States, unlike Sweden. Sweden is a very homogeneous society. So you've got a lot of people who are very similar in Sweden. And so when you have similar values of things like, say, achievement striving and that sort of thing, and highly educated people, you might be able to put together social safety nets that make sense because everybody would be working. In our country, we tend to find that when we have a lot of social safety nets, people figure out ways to game the system, unfortunately. It's very sad. But anyway, going back to this point, When you have a lot of social safety nets, people tend to leave the church, and we have seen that happening in Sweden. So we don't have that. Now, we do definitely have some believers still in Sweden, like my Geo's mother and her father, and they're strong believers who are heavily involved in a church in Sweden. And we do have that kind of thing. And those people are probably high in what they call intrinsic religiosity, meaning your belief is based on your relationship with God. Jesus wants a relationship with us. Okay, so what else has happened with secular societies? Well, one of the things that differentiates the United States from other Western societies is our higher relative levels of religiosity, and especially with beliefs in Christianity. So we have a pretty good portion, over a majority of people in the United States do call themselves Christians. Okay, so we do have that. And this is unlike other cultures. Okay, so another thing that is interesting to note is in the United States, we tend to have a mixture, some fancier churches, some not so fancy churches. A lot of times in the Catholic churches, and this especially you can see in places like Europe, the Catholics have very large churches. Sometimes they were built in the medieval times. A lot of times they were built over a period of decades. And many times they involved many people through different lifetimes who were putting together these churches. Sometimes they were put together by people who were impoverished, helping out. And there's a number of other reasons. But anyway, these churches were put together into very beautiful, massive, awe-inspiring structures. Now, as Max Weber pointed out in The Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, the Protestants were more thrifty and industrious, and they felt like the gospel could be talking to things like prosperity and that God wanted us to be prosperous and wanted us to be thrifty. So they didn't invest the money in the church buildings to the same extent that the Catholics did. And their church buildings were much more humble in many cases. And so what happens is you don't get that awe when you go into the church. I used to think it was a good thing that the Protestants did that. But looking back on it, I actually think the Catholics have something going with the big, beautiful churches. Because you want people who are going into the house of God to have the awe-inspiring sort of feeling when they get there, because God is awe-inspiring. And so anyway, again, moving toward the Protestant area, a lot of the Protestant countries are the ones today that are booming in atheism. Okay, so more atheists are coming out of the closets in these Protestant countries. And with this movement towards atheism, we've seen some different outcomes. Okay, so so that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. But anyway, going back to my friend, my graduate assistant, in the years she and I spent together, we spent hours working through her trials. Again, like I had mentioned before, she had a couple of encounters with very evil people, very evil men. Okay, just put it that way. And so she and I would work together constantly. We spent a lot of time together. Her parents started calling me a doctor as if I were a medical doctor and I was helping her, or some sort of a psychology professor, helping her get through her issues. I was helping her comb through the psychological tangles that had tried to bind her. And I say try to bind her. Very strong woman. She survived. She's an overcomer. One day I gave her a copy of Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, thinking it could help her like it helped me. But I don't think she's read it yet. But that's okay. Maybe one day she will. I actually did not expect the gift she presented to me one day, nor did I expect the tears to follow. She gave me a silver bracelet, an absolute beautiful bangle, and engraved on it on the inside, it said, "Everybody needs the light you have. Let your light so shine." Matthew 5:16. As children of the light, we're empowered by the source of our light to overcome the darkness of this world. Through our light, we can further see through the manipulations and malevolence of the principalities and powers of the spiritual world. As we watch Sweden and the rest of the world slide further and further away from God, we're compelled to identify root causes. Many were initiated in the 19th century under the tutelage of atheists such as Nietzsche and Marx. Their disdain for Christianity and its core tenets of loving the Lord above all else, loving our neighbors as ourselves, valuing the individual over the collective, and respecting human life, liberties, property, and justice contributed to the rebellious writings. They didn't want to live in alignment with the Lord. They didn't want to walk in his way. They wanted to ignore him and pretend that they had killed him. Nietzsche famously said, "And we have killed God." Well, Nietzsche, as C.S. Lewis has pointed out, you can no longer kill God as if you could put out the sun. It's from the inside of your cell, write the words darkness on the wall, thinking that you could put out the sun. That's just not going to happen, just like you're not going to be able to put out God. Today, we have abundant evidence of the ways their ideas, Nietzsche's, Marx's, and others, have corrupted Christian foundations of the West. Let's go to the naked communists. In 1958, former FBI agent Cleon Skousen outlined 45 communist goals in his book, The Naked Communist. On January 10, 1963, Congressman Albert S. Herlong Jr. of Florida presented these goals to the U.S. Congressional Record. Here's some, and I'm quoting these. Get control of the schools. Gain control of all school newspapers. Use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations that are under communist attack. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. Infiltrate the press. Continue discrediting American culture by degrading all form of artistic expression. Promote ugliness, repulsive, meaningless art. Okay, we can see that now if we go into some places like New York. We will find in some of the museums some pretty ugly art, like silly little things, squash, paintings with splats on them, or bicycles, or things that just really aren't beautiful, like something you'd see in the Sistine Chapel. Eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Infiltrate the church and replace revealed religion with social religion. Now, I mentioned at the outset that social religion could be like progressive Christianity or the Unitarian idea, where everyone in universalism is going to go to heaven no matter what you do on the earth. You're going to get up there and you're going to find Hitler and high-five him, and you'll find Stalin and everybody else. Well, guess what? That's not what Jesus said. Particularism applies in Christianity. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a, quote, religious crutch. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the grounds that it violates the principle of separation in church and state. Now, Madalyn Murray O'Hair, who was a famous atheist, did a job of taking care of that in the 1960s. We, of course, can see what's going on in the United States with respect to schools shootings as an outcome of possibly the elimination of prayer in the schools. It's not been a good thing. I go on to what they say. Support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of culture, education, social agencies, welfare programs, mental health clinics, etc. They want control. That's what communists like. They want to have control. Now, in case you're thinking the communist system is a positive thing, think no longer. You're not thinking correctly. Go back and look at the Gulag Archipelago. They also say they want to infiltrate and gain control of more unions. Well, fortunately, since the time when they made that statement, unionization in the United States has decreased significantly. Okay, currently our unionization is about 11%. And if you're looking at public institutions, it's a bit higher. It's more like in the 30% range. But if you're looking at private institutions in the United States, it's more like about 6% of companies are unionized. Or people are unionized, I should say. And back in the 1950s, when much of this was considered or brought up or developed, unionization was more like around 25% in the United States. Now, that's not to say that in other countries in Europe that unionization is at a very low level. In places like Sweden, it's at one point recently, it was about 80% of workers were unionized. What do unions do? They tend to give people collective voice and collective action, but they also stifle things like productivity. Unions tend not to favor productivity. They don't like productivity improvement programs for sure. They want to promote people based on seniority, and they want to stifle productivity in certain ways by having specific lists of exactly what activities workers can do, and they won't allow them to do work that would help other people get their job done. I could go into that for hours because I teach that, but anyway, I digress. They also said they wanted to infiltrate and gain control of big business. Think about some of the big businesses today, especially over in that land of California, okay, in Washington and the West Coast. Discredit the family as an institution. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Did you hear that? Let me read it again. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. The communists like to routinely, in the USSR, separate people from their families. Okay, that was one way that they could brainwash them. They would brainwash children into the communist system. What they also would do was they would get people to rat out on their family members, and then they would throw them into these horrible prisons, these prison camps, and people would end up starving to death. Okay, so let's go back. They also said that they wanted to create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition. Now, you saw what happened in the, quote, Summer of Love there in Seattle and Portland and these other places this past summer. Okay, that was not a good thing. We saw tons of violence, tons of looting. I saw it in my own town of Tampa. I saw people breaking into a Walmart, hundreds of people breaking down the doors of a Walmart. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Okay, this is not protesting. This is just going out there and finding an ideal time that you can go steal. And that's completely horrible. And there's nothing good about that. So these ideas have been exacerbated through social media, which is largely run by liberal and or communist tech giants, such as Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Jack Dorsey of Twitter, Larry Page and Sergey Brin of Google and YouTube, and China's Zhang Yiming of ByteDance, which is the TikTok producer. Social media platforms are notorious time wasters. Unfortunately, it's wasted my time too many times. They often serve as a means to unify and perpetuate chaos through movements that have been ironically mislabeled as social justice. So what is social justice? On its face, the term implies the noble idea of just, fair, and equal behavior or treatment for society. Some who label themselves as social justice warriors believe they're doing so in a very honest way to address the West's remnant right-wingers, racists, and misogynists. However, we have some evidence to suggest that the social justice warrior movement has been hijacked by a very organized group of trained Marxists with a clearly defined agenda. Okay, I'm not naming the site. You all know what it is. Go take a look at it. It's like if I put a title on a site that everyone agrees with, when you look into the site and you look at the About Us page, which they've actually deleted because of what they had in there about the way that they wanted to ruin family units, you're going to see that they had a clearly defined agenda. The leaders of that group have been caught on video saying they're trained Marxists. Okay, they capitalize on good causes, such as standing up to police brutality against George Floyd, to foment discontent, riots, thefts, and chaos. Again, this is completely in alignment with what the communist desires were back in the 60s. Furthermore, those who control social media and much internet traffic now control the way we define terms such as social justice. Google defines social justice as justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. This definition fits snugly within the Marxist plan to redistribute wealth from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Such ideas are contrary to basic human motivations, expectations, and biblical teachings that hard work should be fairly compensated and idle hands are the devil's worship. Okay, one of the things that I make a joke about with communism is I tell my students, how about if all of you work on your tests, and when I get the tests in, I'm just going to average all the grades and you're all going to get the average grade. Would that be fair? Would you deal with that? Well, that's essentially what communism does. Everyone puts in the amount of effort that they can. They put in, some might study hard, some might work hard, but everyone gets the same pay, the same C. Hey, we all get a C. You worked, you actually deserve an A, but I'm going to give you a C. You deserve an F, but I'm going to give you a C. Not fair. Okay. This goes against basic human motivation. One reason why communism crumbled, especially in 1989 in many countries, was because the motivational incentives that humans desire and need were not there. Social justice warriors' goals include dismantling the patriarchy and any power structures in society. SJW movements often call for white men to take a back seat to anyone who can claim they've been oppressed. Victimhood status is revered, while heroism is often ignored. SJW goals often stand in opposition to the equality of opportunities for all, which is embedded in the U.S. Declaration of Independence and the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. SJWs advocate for pro-choice rather than pro-life ideas. Identity politics, which is the idea that everything's focused on one's race or your identity in a member of a group rather than as an individual. One of the things that Christianity does is it values and holds all individuals accountable. As a group member, a lot of times it's your group you identify with to the detriment of the individual. Communists identified with the communistic group, the group of people. And so as the individual's rights were squashed under communism. And they also favor the subjugation of anyone who doesn't have a lived experience as a victim of society. So they really elevate the idea of the victims. Is subordinating the right to life of the unborn to appease a mother's desire for convenience social justice? Think about it. Are movements to defund the police, which will inevitably lead to greater crime and chaos, social justice? Are movements to discredit the traditional family unit in favor of single-parent homes within an impoverished village social justice? Now, you can go to statistica.com and you can look at different races and what the levels of marriage are within these races, and it's really tragic. You're going to find that there are some people, especially in some of the inner cities and in the slums, where there are very high levels of families being raised by just one parent, traditionally the mom. People aren't getting married in some of these places, and this is really tragic because it's hard to work and support a family at the same time. And so it ends up being a cycle, a vicious cycle of repetition. Our movements to discredit biblical teachings, the churches, and church moral codes, social justice? These bowel movements are just the tip of the communist iceberg that has been lurking beneath the surface of our Christian moral foundations over the past 2 centuries. Is it not enough that the ideas of the communistic atheist regimes of the USSR, China, and Cambodia led to the untimely deaths of over 120 million in the 20th century? Can we not flush this grisly excrement from our society once and for all? Does it even matter? Communists often endorse an atheistic worldview in which we're just lucky beneficiaries of undirected evolution. But are we merely dancing to our DNA in a universe with no purpose, no meaning, and just blind, pitiless indifference, as famous atheists such as Richard Dawkins claim? As Christians, we know better than that, but we must stay alert to what's happening in the world around us. As the Apostle Paul said, our enemy is scouring the earth, looking for ways to devour us. Let's let our light so shine to explore the reprobate minds of the dark spirits that surround us. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Whether you eat, drink, whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Thank you.